Welcome this morning. Let's begin with prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Father, you gave us St. Mark the Evangelist. You gave him the privilege of proclaiming your gospel so that he could preach the good news of Jesus Christ. May we profit by his wisdom and follow Christ more faithfully. May we follow in the footsteps of St. Mark and to fall in love with you completely, desiring only your will in our lives. Help us to hear your voice and to be guided by the Holy Spirit to do all that you ask of us. And we ask this through our Lord Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. Through the prayers of St. Mark, may the Lord Jesus Christ have mercy on us all. Amen. Next.
Can't see anymore. I'm Karen Kugelin. I'm Karen Kugelin, and today I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker, Stephen Landregan. Stephen was born in Evansville, Indiana, June 18, 1928. He spent his early years at Assumption Cathedral School in Evansville and graduated from St. Mel High School in Chicago, Illinois. From 1946 to 47, Steve served our country in the United States Army and the United States Air Force from 1950 to 51. He attended Dominican College in River Forest, Illinois, DePaul and Loyola Universities in Chicago, and graduated with a BS in journalism in 1954 from Southern Methodist University. He was also awarded an MA in religious education at the University of Dallas in Irving, Texas in 1973. Steve has held several university teaching positions at SMU, University of Dallas, Our Lady of Lake, Brookhaven College, and the University of Texas Southwestern Medical School. He has worked for WFAA radio station, the Dallas Chamber of Commerce, and St. Paul Hospital in Dallas. From 1962 to 1966, he was at Parkland Memorial Hospital. It was while he was Public Relations Director at Parkland that he was intimately involved with President Kennedy's last hours, as well as the final events involving Oswald's death. Google Steve, and you can read his summary of events for the Warren Commission, as well as watch his press conference regarding Oswald on YouTube. He came to the Diocese of Dallas in 1966, 1 month before St. Mark became a parish, where he has been an editor of the Texas Catholic and is presently historian and archivist. Steve has been involved in numerous professional, hospital, Catholic, and historical organizations and received many awards for his service. He was a member of the National Conference of Catholic Bishops Advisory Council from 74 to 77 and its chairman in 1975. He is a founding member of the National Association of Diaconate Directors, receiving the Directors Award in 1989 and 1996. He has received the Religious Public Relations Council Norvell Slater Award, the Catholic Foundation Award for Outstanding Service to the Dallas Area Catholic Community, the Pope John Paul II Award, and I decide I'm not going to use the Latin term, but it's for the Church and the Pontiff Medal. The Diocese of Dallas Holy Trinity Medal of Honor, the Dallas Press Club Katie Award, the Texas Catholic Historic Society's Lawrence Fitzsimmons Award. He is also author of numerous books and periodical articles. It is with great pleasure that we welcome Steve Landregan at St. Mark's.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm delighted to be here. I want to know how many charter members are here of the parish. Good. That's fine. I'm delighted to hear because you are really the history of the parish. And I feel a little bit embarrassed telling you what your history is because you are it. Those of you who are charter members and those of you who have been here since then. My association, can you hear me, everybody?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. My association with St. Mark's goes back a long way. As it was mentioned, I came to work for the diocese in 1966, the year that your parish was founded. And in March of that year, I became editor of the Texas Catholic. In September, one of my very first assignments as editor was to come out here with your first pastor, Father Dutch Ryan, and take his picture in that vacant lot across the street there that ran on the front page of the Texas Catholic. And so I feel that I have some roots here, even though I'm not a member of the parish. Now that was a long time ago, and some of you were here and some of you remember it. I'm going to ask Ginny here first. Ginny, tell me what this was like in those days.
I lived on 18th off of Rigsby, and there was really nothing developed west of 75. And we went to St. Paul's, and Bishop Gorman had the Paulist priest with myself and my husband, Joe and Jamie Ramsey, Carol and Bob Schwartz, get a mission kit. And our altar was a flat door with legs on it that folded out. And the chalice and all that. And then we were in the back of the building, which is on Avenue J off 14th Street. And it was called the Community House at the time. And we had Mass there. And then we moved to Mendenhall School, because they were still, I don't know who was saying Mass over at St. Anthony's, and it wasn't a parish yet, it was still a mission. But, and we were Catholic. There were not a lot of Catholics around here at the time. And it was an interesting journey.
Good, good, thank you. One of you, you other charter members now, share some of your memories. What was it like to have Mass over at Mendenhall? Some of you who had children there. Anybody? Oh, don't be bashful. You all held your hand up. Surely you've got something to tell us about it. Well, I will tell you that when we, all right,
We have one over there.
go ahead, please,
Back here. Back here.
over here.
Hi. Yes, when we first came to this parish, we were having Mass over at Siegler Elementary.
You stand up so others can hear you.
I came here when I was about the age of 10, and we were having Mass over at Siegler. So we were.
Siegler, yeah.
Yeah, so we came when they were having Mass over there, and when we started building the church, it was just now the school. But that's when we showed up, Mass at Siegler.
And did you have young children at that time?
She was 10.
Well, you were the young child.
I was a kid.
Okay, now Siegler, first of all, as Jenny said, was at Mendenhall, but that was before the parish was founded, when you were still part of St.
Right.
Paul. And so Siegler then was after the parish was founded. I asked about the masses at the school because I have some memories of my own. I just wanted to see if anybody else had similar memories up here. Who else wants to tell us about masses at the school? Oh, yeah. Okay, first you.
We went to Siegler, and we sat on the tables where they had the cafeteria. And when they rang the communion bell, my little one was just over a year old. Kiki, Mommy, every Sunday she would say that as soon as they ring the bell.
Good.
I remember Mass at Siegler, and then we had daily Mass at one of the houses on Brentwood.
Now,
That was a
did either one of you have small children then?
Oh, yes.
Did you by any chance have children who were small enough that they still needed bottles? Milk?
No.
Well, I asked that because we had a similar experience in the parish where I grew up. And we started in a school that the auditorium had a deep slope on it. And this was before the days of plastic bottles. And occasionally you would hear a nursing bottle drop and either broke or else it rolled all the way down to the front of the place. Those were very good days. Now also, tell me about the chapel that was in the rectory. Who remembers that?
When Father Ryan came, the women started collecting S&H green stamps, and we would go over almost daily.
Oh, yes, S&H green
We used to go over there daily to help furnish, and it was the gray brick house. And the garage was made into the chapel because I had a daughter baptized there.
Oh, did you?
Well, she was baptized at the hospital, Presbyterian, because she was preemie, and then we finished the ceremony.
And Presbyterian was brand new.
It was.
Absolutely.
She was one of the first, she was born in '67.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, we would go over there and we got pots and pans and what did he need and all that stuff. And I said, well, I never bought priest sheets. Do you want your basic white? He said, no, but nothing flowery. And it was just so exciting. And I don't want to monopolize, but I have to tell you one more thing about him. When I had my daughter at Presbyterian, we were very close with Father, as well a lot of people were. And he came down to baptize her because we didn't know if she would make it. So, and then he came and he had a bag of donuts. Well, in the before
This was Father Ryan?
Father Ryan.
Yeah.
And my roommate had her baby, she was from St. Paul's. So when Father Ryan came and I said, my roommate is from St. Paul's, and he said, well, I have communion, would you like communion? No, someone will come from my parish, but thank you. So he brought the donuts, because we always brought donuts when we had a meeting at the rectory. So anyway, after he left, the woman said, is he a relative? And I said, no. Well, I never heard of a priest bringing donuts with communion. And then my last thing is...
Father Cliff, you hear that? Is he still yeah, there?
The last thing about that is, my husband and I went to confession one time in the chapel. Bless me, Father, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, Ginny, are there a lot of people out there? I said, you are not to say my name in here. I'm not coming to you anymore. And he said, I won't tell any. Where are you going? I said, we're going down in Greenville to get beer. Wait for me. And then later on, he left the priesthood, and we met him and his wife. And we had given him a dachshund. And I said, name her sister so-and-so. And he said, no, I'm going to name her Duchess. You know, my name is Dutch. And
Yeah.
that's all.
I was at his ordination, Dutch Ryan. And the reason is he was a cousin of my parish priest from Chicago. And he came down for the ordination. And so he said, you want to go over? So I went to his ordination. That was the first time I met him. That's good. Anybody else have something you want to share about the early days? Somebody back there? I can't tell if you're scratching your head or if you're working. Well, I tell you, those were very interesting days. And let me help you recall some of the things from that period of time that you might be interested in. First of all, Plano at that time was morphing from a country town to a major city. In 1960, the population of Plano was 3,600. In 10 years, it was 17,000. And so this parish was established right in the middle of that in 1966. And those were, as you said earlier, there wasn't much out here. Now, right along in here somewhere, there was a woodworker by the name of Mr. Green. And anybody who don't remember this? And we came out here, and coming out to Plano was a Sunday drive in the country. And so we came out to Plano because somebody said He makes wonderful furniture, and he's reasonable. And we came out here, this would have been in the early 60s, and he made a beautiful cherry harvest table for us. And he charged us, get this, $125. And of course, my son has that table, and it's got a few marks on it for having gone through the years. But that's an early memory here. I also came out about that time in '66 because the Methodist church, or maybe it was the Baptist church, it was right close to the freeway, called the diocese and said they wanted someone to come out and talk to a Sunday school class about the Catholic Church. And so I got elected. I came out, and it was a very interesting session. It was a white church close to the freeway there, to come out and talk about the Catholic Church. And this was, of course, right after the council, when people were beginning to think about ecumenism, and we were interested. They had something we call living room dialogues at that time, where you met couples from different denominations and tried to share what you had. And those were interesting days. So the important thing about here, Plano, is that it was part of that tremendous boom that took place in North Texas that turned North Texas from a rather lazy community into the 5th largest metropolitan area in the United States. That's what we are. We're the 5th largest metropolitan area in the United States. Now, a lot of things were happening at that time. One thing is, and this is something that those of you who were young mothers at that time may well remember this. That was the year Pampers invented disposable diapers. Now, some of you appreciate what a great advancement that was.
Oh, yeah.
Anybody who has washed diapers in a cold toilet bowl will know exactly how important disposable diapers became. They used to come and bring a load every week and then come and take them back. Some of you may remember that. Yes. It was very, very different. And of course, another thing is, how many people had a cell phone back there? How many people even thought about having a cell phone? And how about a computer, even a desktop computer? The computers that they had took up whole rooms. And they had big old spinning tape reels on them. So I say that because so many things have changed since that time. We tend to forget about the tremendous change that happened. The demographics were another thing that was definitely contributory to this. After the Second World War, the Rust Belt began to vacate and the Sun Belt began to grow. And so many of the people, the companies from the north came down here. And I think of Chance Vaught was the first one that came there. They came down here, and a lot of them came down here, and they brought jobs with them. But now the demographics, not only for the nation were shifting, but the Catholic demographics were shifting. Let me give you an example. Before the Second World War, most Catholics were basically blue-collar, high school education, still somewhat in the immigrant mentality. We still were very defensive about Protestants. It was us and them. And that was really, I can remember my grandfather finding out that I had a paper route, and I picked up the papers in front of a Presbyterian church, and he said, "Don't you dare go into that church." And that was not uncommon. So later, when they started up, that church started up the first Cub Scout pack in the city I lived in. My mother signed me up, and she said, "For God's sake, don't tell your grandfather." And so I learned to keep secrets back there. But what happened is, when the Second World War came around, the tendency of Catholics to get together in ethnic enclaves, particularly in the big cities, that was all changed by the Second World War, because those of us who were called into the service, and I said at the very end of the Second World War, we were called in and suddenly we were mixed up with everybody else. We were mixed up with Protestants, with atheists, with Jews, and whatever. And we suddenly discovered that we had a lot more in common than we realized that we did. And so in one sense, the ecumenical movement had its roots in the people who were called into the military in the Second World War. So anyhow, but that's not the end of the story, because after the Second World War, the GI Bill was signed up, and the GI Bill is what really changed Catholic demographics completely and had a direct effect upon this parish. Because first of all, Catholics suddenly could go to college free, and what happened is that we moved as a group from the blue collar to white collar and to professional groups after the Second World War. Now, some of you who may remember from that, but I can remember at SMU the trailer village that was there at the south end of the campus down there, and nothing but veterans trailers. There's nothing there but a church parking lot right now, but that was very much the case. So what happened is, right after the war, the Catholics who had previously had not gone to college, because it was not just Catholics, but high school was pretty much standard at that time. Suddenly they went to college, they were educated, they became teachers, they became doctors, they became engineers, and then instead of when they got married, instead of moving in with mom and dad, which prior to the Second World War was kind of the pattern, you got married when you couldn't afford to, whoever could afford to get married, I might have. You got married and you couldn't afford to, so you moved in with the folks until things stabilized a little bit. And then you would rent a house and so forth. That all changed with the GI Bill, because what would happen, they would get the GI Bill and they bought a house in the burbs. And this is what happened as far as the diocese here is concerned. Because, let me tell you the effect. Now, you realize that this did not hit the burbs until the 1950s, because after the war, they went back to college, they got married and so forth. So let me tell you just a little bit about that. You know, I have notes and I abandoned them. I could come back and see where I but I have to, this is my security blanket, you know. And so, there were only 2 parishes established in the Diocese of Dallas in the 1940s. I'm going to see if anybody can guess what they might have been.
The Sacred Heart Cathedral.
You what?
Sacred Heart Cathedral.
No, that was established in 1872.
That was our first parish when we moved down here.
And no, the 2 parishes were Christ the King, which at that time was the farthest north that the diocese had moved. Now remember, this is the other side of Loop 12. The other side of Loop 12. And St. Bernard's, which was this side of Buckner Boulevard. So we were still within the loop that Loop 12 had. Incidentally, when Loop 12 was built, the head of the highway department's name was Colonel Slaughter. And some of you may remember, he had a big house right at the north end of Bachman Lake. There's all kinds of things there, but Slaughter's house was there. And of course, it just happened that when he built Northwest Highway, it went by his house. So the highway became known as Slaughter's Folly. And the story was that everybody said, we will never, ever need a highway that far north. Now, when we built the LBJ freeway, what did people say? We will never, ever need a highway that far north. And guess what happened when the Bush Turnpike was built? We will never, ever. And so the more things change, the more they are the same. And it kind of reminds me of the story in Chicago when they had their first street lights in the 1890. The mayor gave a speech and he said, "What more could happen? We have reached the ultimate. There's nothing more we can do. We have gas lights on every corner." So we never realize what the future is and how much it is. Now I mentioned very earlier that the effect here, and in the 1940s there were 2 parishes built. Now in the 1950s, this is when it hit here. And this just shows the way that the diocese was growing. At that time, we had a brand new bishop, Bishop Thomas K. Garman. And he came to us from the Diocese of Reno, Nevada. And I don't know if that said anything, but he was a good money raiser. I don't know if he's been successful out there at the tables or not, but that was before Las Vegas. Reno was really the first big gambling center. It was also the center for divorce at that particular time, Reno, Nevada. So what happened then between 1952 and 1958, this is in a 6-year period. 9 new parishes were established. Think of where these parishes are then. St. Thomas Aquinas, which of course is near East Dallas. Our Lady of Lourdes, which is far west Dallas, out almost to Loop 12. St. Monica, which is in North Dallas. St. Philip, which was out off Buckner Boulevard in far East Dallas. St. Pius X, which is also far East Dallas. Holy Cross down near Loop 12 in the South Dallas. Mary Immaculate in Farmers Branch. And St. Paul in Richardson. So you see the circle is moving out from that time. And this is, if you look on a map, this is almost the outer circle. And then of course what comes next is, of course, the 1960s, and this was what we're interested in. Because between 1961 and 1968, 7 more parishes were erected. 7 more, and again, this is in a 7-year period. And these parishes were St. Rita, coming out farther north. You see them coming in north, you see what's happening here. St. Rita, St. Patrick, Northeast Dallas, Holy Family of Nazareth in Irving, the Dallas Naval Air Station Chapel, which doesn't really count as a church, St. Jude's Chapel in downtown, and St. Francis in Frisco, and St. Mark in Plano. So those were all established in the 1960s. And so we can go on because the same pattern goes on in the 1980s and 1990s, until the fact now is that the northern end of the Dallas metropolitan area is really Baja, Oklahoma. and so that's the way it goes. And now, of course, where are we moving? We're moving out towards Murphy and to St. Paul, which is really where we started, because St. Paul was the first church in this diocese. And it was a mission station in 1869. There's nothing there but a cemetery now. But that was the first church in the present Diocese of Dallas. And if you look at the diocesan coat of arms, you'll see crossed swords on there. And across the sword is a symbol of St. Paul, and they are on there in recognition of the first parish in the diocese was St. Paul in St. Paul. But it's interesting that we're moving back to where we started now in that area, and it won't be long before there's probably another parish out in St. Paul again. Okay, so let's stop for a moment here again and think about 1966. Some of you may not have been born yet. I don't think there are very many of you, because I look out there and I see too many that are identified with me. In any event, some of you may have been born yet. Others may remember as teenagers, and others we've talked about earlier were in the process of raising a family. And there were a lot of us who were doing that at that time. So to put it in perspective, I just want to remind you of a couple of other things. We've talked about the diapers, and we talked about cell phones and computers. Let me remind you that this was the middle of the Vietnamese War, and that was the center of everybody's awareness at that time. You know, everybody had somebody in Vietnam, somebody who came back from Vietnam, somebody who died there, or somebody who was about to be drafted and go there. We still had the draft back there. And that was a very different thing. And that was the year that the Gallup poll showed that a majority of Americans, for the first time, were opposed to America being in the Vietnamese War. 51% were against the war in Vietnam. This was a very difficult time for us, a very traumatic time. And the interesting story is, in the days before we had so many television and radio stations on the cable stations and so forth, pretty much the pundit for the country was Walter Cronkite. How many remember Walter? President Johnson said that when Walter Cronkite came out in opposition to the Vietnamese War, he knew that we lost. And I think that is true, because Cronkite pretty much reflected the national attitude. And when he came out that way, it really made a big difference. So, oh, by the way, a first-class stamp, which just went down in price for the first time in a long time. But you could send a first-class letter for, guess what?
3 cents.
A nickel.
1 nickel.
A nickel. And unemployment was 4.5%.
Wow, that's a lot.
And that was pretty low. The LBJ was president, and guess who was installed as governor of California that year?
Reagan.
Ronald Reagan. Right, yeah. So that kind of helps us put a frame around this. Now, for those sports fans here, I'll tell you that the Orioles beat the LA Dodgers in the World Series in 4 straight games. And that was a tough one. And south of us, a little project called the Houston Astrodome opened in 1966. And that was really neat. Now, I want to move from that to something different. Father Cliff said, and he wrote this in your book for the anniversary. He said, "This parish was born out of the council, and that the parish became immersed in living the renewal through 50 years. I want you to think about that, because that is very much the story of this parish. This is a Vatican II parish. The advantage of being started when you did not have to go through the trauma that other parishes did. You did not have to tear down a communion rail that somebody's aunt had given. You did not have to move statues that somebody else's mother had given. And you did not have to deal with the people who said, why in the world is the priest going to face us, and we have that beautiful altar up there? And a lot of parishes, and some of you may remember from being in other parishes, that was a pretty traumatic time for some of us. It was a time when things that had been forbidden became mandated, and things that had been mandated became forbidden. And I think the best thing I can say is the people of God were a little bit confused. And I think one of the reasons is that the Second Vatican Council was a 4-year event. And during that 4 years, the bishops who were participating went through a change, a gradual change. And it took 4 years to do it. Unfortunately, when the Vatican documents came out, and when the bishops came back and started implementing the changes, none of us had had that 4 years of experience. And all of a sudden, these changes were dropped upon us. And we were a little bit shocked by it all. At least that has been my experience. And so many things changed so rapidly that we just had a hard time handling it. And I think a lot of the polarization that we see in the Catholic Church today is the result of the fact that the laity and even the clergy, I'd say, were not really prepared properly for the changes of Vatican II. They did not have a chance to go through the process that the bishops did to know why these changes were being made and so forth. And I really think had we had better catechesis before all these changes were dumped on us, that it would have been a little bit smoother ride, however. In any event, it was a tremendous advantage for St. Mark because you were starting afresh and you were starting anew. And you did not have to worry about the baggage that other parishes had. I know in the parish that I was in, it was very, very traumatic because there are people who said, why in the world are we doing this? Now, St. Mark did not have to do that. And St. Mark also came about a time when the clergy were not as abundant as they had been. So the lay people had to evolve here, and they emerged all over the place. As a matter of fact, what you did here was really an icon for the diocese. I think in terms particularly of your family life. George and Judy Clark are not here, but George and Judy Clark were really the people who taught the diocese how to do family life ministry. And you still have that here. You have the counseling here, the ministry here. You were the pioneers on the youth ministry for the diocese. And the reason it is that you did not have that baggage. You were starting anew. You knew it was going to be done. It had to be done under your pastors, but it had to be done by the lay people. And so you just got in and did it. You did not have any multimillionaires. You had all people who were middle class or upper middle class, and they all had the same problem. They all had mortgages. They all were paying off on their fences that they built. They all had kids that they were going to school. And so you had a commonality there that built community. And you built community by going to Sigler School together and having that experience. You built community by going to the chapel in the rectory up until you had this church to get your babies baptized. You stood there in church and the priest was baptizing in globo. In other words, he had 15 people to be baptized at the same time. And those are the things that really build community. Building a parish is the greatest community builder that I know. And you did it here, and you did it in the new way because you did not have a history that gave you problems. And I think that that's one of the big secrets of your parish here, why it has been so successful, and it is. So you built community by building a parish. And you built a school, and you built a church, and everybody was in the same place. Now, the council called for lay involvement, and you showed the rest of the diocese what lay involvement was. You pioneered so many things. You pioneered collaborative work with other parishes, the women's conferences, the men's movement that you are working with other parishes in the neighborhood. That's not happening anywhere else in the diocese. It's not happening the way that it's happening here. And not surprisingly, you generated vocations to the priesthood and to the diaconate because vocations come from an active and involved community. Now, Pope Francis, in his recent apostolic exhortation, Amoris Laetitia, emphasizes time and again the importance of being a welcoming community. You are a welcoming community. I met with Father Cliff the other day, and he was telling me how many people you have from all over the diocese, not just from the boundaries of the parish, but from all over. And the reason for that is you make people feel at home. You make people feel part of it. You don't go in and feel like you might as well be in a mega First Baptist church and not know a single soul. So St. Mark's has demonstrated how to be a welcoming community and how to handle diversity. From the very beginning, you had diversity in this parish. You had a large Hispanic element. And instead of isolating them, so you had two separate communities side by side, you embrace and involve, so you have a single community with Hispanics and Anglos, and of course others that have come in since then. So the Holy Father also emphasizes the importance of reaching out to the poor and the vulnerable. Your parish organizations, including St. Vincent de Paul, Pro-Life, Compassionate Ministry, the We Care Ministry, and others, are all missionary disciples, as the Pope calls them. I was absolutely astounded at the number of parish ministries and non-parish based ministries you have. You have 48. I don't know if a parish in the diocese has 48 different parish groups that are still active, as you do here. I sat down and counted them in your parish bulletin, and there are 21 of them are non-parish based, which means they're part of an international or a national organization. And then 27 of them are parish organizations. That's pretty astounding, and I think and pretty wonderful. So the Pope calls for the church to be a field hospital. Some of you may have a better image of a field hospital than others, but a field hospital is a hospital in a tent close to the front lines that pick up the people who have just been wounded. And you may remember MASH when it was a television show. That was a field hospital. And I think they had a little more fun there, and maybe they did in some other field hospital. But it was a field hospital. And what the Pope writes is this. He says, the thing the church needs most today is the ability to heal wounds and to warm the hearts of the faithful. Let me repeat that. The thing the church needs most today is the ability to heal wounds and to warm the hearts of the faithful. That is the description of a field hospital. As a matter of fact, he just came back from a trip to Greece earlier today, where he and Patriarch Bartholomew I, who is the ecumenical patriarch of all the Orthodox churches, visited the island together. And he and the patriarch have become pretty good friends. They have had several sessions. This is very significant, I think, because we are definitely moving on a track that ultimately I think will lead to the restoration of communion with the Orthodox. So anyhow, just look around you. Through the leadership of your pastors, Father Ryan, Monsignor Claude Smith, who was a legend in his own time, and he gave you 30 years of his life. And you know, when I first came to Dallas, we identified the priest from Ireland as FBI, foreign born Irish. Now that is kind of significant because when the Irish kind of hijacked the Catholic Church when they came over after the Great Famine and during the Great Famine. Prior to that time, the influence in the Catholic Church had been from the English Church, which came over as a persecuted church and kept a low profile. And then the French, who came over after the Revolution, and they had a tremendous influence on our seminaries. Most of our seminaries still follow basically that French form. But when the Irish came, they had the language, and that made the difference. And Robert Morris, in his book, America Catholic, says this. He said, between 1850 and 1960, 85% of the hierarchy, that means the bishops, in the United States were Irish or of Irish extraction. So when I say the Irish came and they hijacked the church, they really did. And if you're from the North, you'll remember. Now, of course, the guy that shaped the Catholic Church that I grew up in was Dagger John Hughes, Archbishop Hughes, who built St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York, and who was the one who, because we were running into so much anti-Catholicism, a lot of hatred, that he said, all right, we were going to create our subculture, a Catholic subculture. And when I grew up, and when a lot of you grew up, we still had that Catholic subculture. We had our Catholic colleges, we had our Catholic hospitals, we had our Catholic funeral homes, and everything else. That's kind of dissipated now. But Archbishop Hughes was the one who started that, along with Catholic Charities and everything else. And he did it because of the fact that some of the leading Americans, Mark Twain, for instance, Samuel F.B. Morris, the Atlantic Monthly, were violently anti-Catholic in everything that they did. And they said Catholics cannot become a good American because they are loyal to a foreign prince. And guess who the foreign prince was? The Pope, of course. So that things are very different. In any event, thank God for our FBI priests, because they really came in at a time when, particularly in areas in this part of the country, we're not getting vocations because we didn't have any Catholics. And so that's kind of a side on Father or Monsignor Claude Smith. Then you had Duffy Gardner. And incidentally, pray for him. He's quite ill. And then, of course, Father Cliff, who's been with you for a decade here. And so the commitment of these pastors and the tremendous work and commitment of the laity in this parish, and the generosity, and I say generosity because look around you at the parish plant that you have. There's not a parish in the diocese that has anything to compare to what you have now. With the legacy building here, the building across the street. I've gotten lost out here several times. and then, of course, the other, you have a magnificent plant here. And these things don't pop out by themselves. They're here because of the work of the parishioners and the vision of your pastors in seeing an opportunity and jumping on it. Too often, people don't have the courage to take advantage of an opportunity, and so it never comes back. That has not been the case here. So, you have fashioned a Christian community that has effectively and compassionately continued the healing and forgiving ministry of Jesus in the heart of North Texas for half a century. And the thing is, you have only begun. I have been here for 50 years. I'm going to be retiring this year. But you are not going to be retiring, and you've got a future ahead of you, and you have just celebrated the first 50 years of the many that you'll celebrate. Thank you very much. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have. Now, I'll be 88 in June. I'm not a spring chicken. So one of the the things that happen in the ripening process is you lose your hearing. So I have to come up and close to you to hear what you're going to ask. Yeah.
When you were mentioning the different parishes and the growth, you didn't say anything about Sacred Heart Cathedral, which
Well,
later become,
Sacred Heart Cathedral, thank you. Sacred Heart Cathedral was established in 1872, the first parish in Dallas. Prior to that time, we have been served on horseback, first from Nacogdoches by circuit riders, and then from St. Paul by circuit riders. The Bishop Claude Dubuis, one of our many French bishops, aside here. If you look at the Diocese coat of arms, it has 3 fleur-de-lis on there, and that is a tribute to, of course, the fact that we surround the Trinity River, but also the French priests who were the first who came here. In any event, it was established in 1872, and the first pastor was Father Landregan Perrier, just like the water, as a matter of fact. The first place they met was the Oddfellows Hall. Now, I've been to the public library and every place. Nobody has a picture of the Oddfellows Hall. But most of the churches in Dallas in the early days started in Oddfellows Hall because it was the only hall in town. So in 1873, the first parish was built. Now, while they were still in Oddfellows Hall, Father Perrier said, we need to choose a name for this community. And he said, of course, it's your decision, but I think it should be named after the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Well, it was primarily an Irish community then, and most of the men had gotten together, and they decided it was going to be St. Patrick. But the women went with the pastor, and so it became Sacred Heart Cathedral. And at the cathedral, you look up there now, the main window of the altar is St. Margaret Mary Alacoque receiving with a vision of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. So it was started. The first church was built in about 8 months, frame church, where the old post office is downtown right now. The old post office street down on Bryan Street. Now, in 1890, when this was made a diocese, then the Sacred Heart was made the pro-cathedral. Pro-cathedral means temporary cathedral. And in 1902, the present cathedral was built, but it was not complete because they didn't have enough money to put the steeple on it, or the bell tower. And it was not until 2003 that it was completed. And the interesting thing is that the person who gave the largest amount of money to complete that was a member of one of the founding families. That was the Moroni. His great-grandfather was the first attorney for the Diocese of Dallas. As a matter of fact, I found, for the church here, I found when they bought the land in St. Paul, his name was on the contract. So the Moroni family has been around for a long time. And I think it's kind of neat that it was one of the founding families that did that. Anyhow, so that's the cathedral. Now, that was it was the first parish in Dallas. The second one in 1880 was St. Patrick's. The Irishmen finally got their wish. The second one got to be St. Patrick's, even though it was an Italian community. You knew who had the influence there. And then the first parish in Oak Cliff was Corpus Christi, and the pastor there said, we speak English, not Latin, and changed the name to Blessed Sacrament. And incidentally, St. Mark Parish stole the name from a parish in Arlington. The parish in Arlington that is now St. Matthew's was originally St. Mark. And Bishop Garman switched them because he was trying to get 4 parishes named after the 4 evangelists when this was established: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Luke was already in Irving because it was a very early parish. So Matthew then ended up and St. John's. I forgot which St. John's it was. But anyhow, that's how you got to be the name here. Because the most parishes today, the parishioners get a chance to choose a name. All Saints couldn't agree on a name, so they did All Saints. Thank you for that question, Jim. Anything else? Good. Over here? Okay. I want to tell you that if you have not, my most recent book, which I wrote for the Quasquicentennial, or maybe it's Quisquicentennial. Anyhow, we decided nobody knew what the word meant, so we just called it 125th anniversary. Much less spelling. Called about the future. That the past is the prologue to the future. It's available free online as an ebook. And if you go to the diocesan website, which is very easy to remember, CathDal, like CatholicDallas.org, and you, the URL, put a slash at the end and put prologue, it'll bring it up and you can download it. But I think you'll find it's interesting because we got all kinds of pictures in the story of the diocese from the very early days. Okay? All right. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
St. Paul's, if people don't know where it is, it's off of 1378, and you go east
Just
toward
keep
Lake
going
Lewan.
beyond Murphy.
Right, my daughter lives out there.
Yeah.
But they are building homes out there.
Yeah.
And
And
so
that's
it's building
going
up.
to be the next new parish.
Mhm.
And there, the old cemetery
That'd
is
be
still there.
interesting.
Yeah, the old cemetery is still there.
Right.
And that parish was absorbed by the Wiley parish about 1900. You know, thank you. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, you can just Google it, but I mean,
Very well.
diocese.